ran through the fortress stealing stuff. Armour, weapons, food, clothing, money. They even stole the Archbishop of Canterbury. At low tide, the moat became little more than a mire of raw human poo. Carcasses from the meat market at Smithfield were often dumped in there. Plague victims were tossed in there. Whenever it rained in London, and believe it or not, it rains a lot in London, the streets would get a much-needed wash. All the offal from the butchers was thrown into the street. All the horse poo, they didn't care where they dropped it. It all got washed out into our moat. We had everything in there. Typhoid, anthrax, plague, polar bears. Oh yes, don't shake your head at me. Hands up if you believe me about the polar bears. Thank you. Yeah. Shame on the rest of you. I'm not allowed to make this stuff up. I'm one of Her Majesty's most trusted men. We had polar bears in the moat. The Tower of London was the first zoo anywhere in Britain. It was the home of the Royal Menagerie. Nobody really knows why we had a Royal Menagerie, but I've got a theory. Kings and queens of Europe don't like each other very much. Most of our history is about fighting each other. I think that backs that up. But when they weren't fighting, they had to be civil, and they would give each other gifts, a bit like a family Christmas. Impressive gifts that no one would want it. So, to annoy us, the King of France gave us an elephant in 1254. We didn't even know what it was. It cost us a fortune to look after, and I'm pretty sure the French knew it would. They gave us lions and tigers too. The polar bears were a gift from Norway, and they were allowed to swim in the moat to catch fish. But it wasn't all they caught. They caught cholera and died. So as a toilet, the moat was a complete failure. But as a line of defence, you've got to agree it was superb. It stank though, and this is a royal palace. You don't put up with a smell like that in a royal palace. The moat did not last very long. A mere 500 years later, in 1843, it was drained, filled in about 15 feet or 5 metres to the height you see today, and was then laid to lawn. Look how lush and green the grass grows. It's incredibly fertile ground. The outer wall of the fortress was built in the 1280s. 2 strong bastions to the north dominate the approaches from the city. Leggs Mount over there was modified in Tudor times to house cannon. Any approach from the north would have been suicidal. Along this line were the 6 towers, to defend us against an unlikely attack from the river. The Bayward Tower is just one of them, but that's unique. That is the only landward entry into the fortress. As we go through the archway, look up, you might see the spikes of the portcullis, the drop gate. That drop gate weighs 1.5 tons. It dates from 1286. So does the rope which holds it up. So we're going to go through there really quickly. Come on! Chop, chop! Now, have you been slowed down by all these coins in these houses? They're known as casemates. I know that because they've written it on the wall. And these are now the homes of some of my yeoman warder colleagues and their families. All yeoman warders, people like myself, get to live here. And this is a reward for our military service. Overwhelmingly, we are drawn from the army. We do have 4 from the Royal Air Force. Nobody talks to them. We have 2 from the Royal Marines and 2 from the Royal Navy. Instantly identifiable because they're usually holding hands and skipping. Many of my colleagues are married. Some of them are happy, the others have children. But ladies, I'm single. I live in a castle in central London with parking. I'm on Facebook. Just thought I'd put that out. Yeah. Now, as you can see, some of my colleagues have tried to make Mint Street look nice. They've spectacularly failed. No amount of potted plants or shrubs are going to hide the fact that this is a killing ground. Yeah, sadly no longer operational. As an attacking army, you'd have lost dozens, probably hundreds of men, trying to get through that festering bog of a moat. Wrestling with the polar bears, trying to climb the wall. And all the time you're doing that, there are people trying to kill you. So it's unlikely you'd have got this far, but if you did, unlucky. And you might not have noticed it yet. If you're a woman, you won't have, because there's a shop over there, and you're naturally distracted. Behind me, there is another wall. This one, yeah. This is the inner defensive wall, and it dates from the 1220s. It has 13 defensive towers and a 50-foot curtain. Soldiers on the ramparts and fighting tops would now be hurling vicious verbal abuse at you. Not to mention stones, arrows, buckets of boiling waste, unwanted children, everything. It's not a healthy place to stand, but it's one of my favourites. Here you can see an evolution in medieval defensive architecture. Prior to the Crusades, Europeans were a bit thick, and we couldn't build anything circular. We lacked the science for it. We could build these things with flat walls and corners, but we couldn't build large circular structures. Now this had a knock-on effect. In Europe, when you wanted to besiege a fortress, you would tunnel underneath it, prop up the cornerstones, set fire to the props, and when they collapsed, so would the tower. Clever, eh? Now, when we went off on the Crusades to go and have a go at the Muslims, the Saracens, we came to the fortress of Antioch, and we tunnelled underneath and tried to find a cornerstone in a circular tower. They had the science to build them round. We couldn't do that. So we couldn't drop them in the normal way. So we employed things like catapults, Perriers, trebuchets and the like to launch heavy objects at them. But round towers dissipated the energy much more efficiently. They were so much stronger for a lot less time. And I don't know, I'm just buoyed up by that at the moment. It's a great time to visit London. But anyway, that's, I shouldn't get into that because it's making me happy and that's not my usual position. Anyway, this is the world infamous Traitor's Gate. That was sound effects there, and you're not getting charged anymore. Traitor's Gate is not its original name. Originally, this was known as the Watergate. Get over that, America. Barges would come in here and they would offload stores and provisions. For that reason, it quickly became known as the Trader's Gate, like the tradesman's entrance, yeah? Now, in the 16th century, there was something of a human traffic, largely one way. And a lot of these people were prisoners, many of them accused of treason, and the watermen slid the name to Traitor's Gate. We've had fairly famous traitors come through here. Queen Anne Boleyn, Henry VIII's second wife, Queen Catherine Howard, Henry VIII's fifth wife. And I shall speak more about these two floozies later when I show you where they were killed and where they lie to this day. Mel Gibson should have been brought here and given a really hefty slap. Now, I know that most of you will have seen the colossally inaccurate comedy Braveheart. Now, barely a day goes by without some demented Scot demanding to know, where did you keep William Wallace? Here is our forefather. Check out my blue face and the family resemblance. And that's just the women. Now, it is true that in the winter of 1299, Sir William Wallace did pass through these gates, but you have already spent longer in the Tower of London than Sir William Wallace ever did. You see, he was a knight of the Scottish court, and the English are quite clever at insulting people, and they classed him as a commoner. They didn't recognise the court of Scotland, so it was an insult to all Scots. And they took him out of the fortress immediately, because commoners weren't held here. He was taken a mile and a half away to the northwest, where they knew there'd be a big crowd, Smithfield Market. And there, in full public view, he was ignominiously hanged by the neck until he was
happy.
Really rather uncomfortable. They only half-hanged him. They hauled him up, let him swing, let him down, took the noose from around his neck, revived him, and when he came round he saw a knife. Now alarmingly, this was going into his chest, but it was pulled down in a line nipples to navel, so he was opened up. Don't worry, it wasn't a fatal wound, and it was never meant to be. William Wallace was entirely conscious when his executioner's hands plunged inside and disemboweled him. 36 feet of his intestines, spilling out onto the pavement with a dash of blood which must have steamed in the cold winter air. These entrails were then placed on a hot griddle where they sizzled. And it's at this point that Mel Gibson would have you all believe a man can shout, freedom! No, I don't think that's likely. He must have had other things on his mind. Imagine that you can smell yourself cooking. Your heart's being ripped out. That's got to be a distraction, hasn't it? His heart was thrown into a brazier to burn. That probably killed him. The head was taken off, that was left on London Bridge. The body hacked into 4 pieces, and those quarters were then parboiled to preserve them for their long journey north to the border towns between England and Scotland, where they were left on their gate as a warning to the barbaric, troublesome Scots not to upset the clearly civilised, peace-loving and harmonious bloody English. So William Wallace, a truly great man of a truly great nation, was hanged, drawn and
quartered.
Set a redhead. You certainly don't upset a Tudor. Her grandfather, Henry Tudor, defeated Richard at the Battle of Bosworth in 1485. He didn't have a claim to the throne, but he took the crown from Richard's dead head and placed it upon his own. He declared himself king, and he could not have done that if these lads had been alive. At the time, nobody knew or even thought they were dead. Maybe he did. It is entirely possible that Henry Tudor ordered the murder of those 2 boys. Shakespeare couldn't write that, not if he wanted to keep his head. The important lesson here is that history is not the past. Far from it. History is just the story of the past. It's usually written by the people who win. This explains why French history books are very thin, lots of empty pages or big pictures. Now we do know that what Shakespeare referred to as the Tower of Blood, Elizabeth I chose to name the Bloody Tower. Marvel of medieval defensive architecture. 2.5-ton oak and steel portcullis, 700 years old, is in perfect working order. It is the gateway to the inner ward, and we're about to charge through it. Charge is a military term. It means to move rapidly, to engage in eager combat with an enemy. So let's not have the Italians at the front. Charge! Purely to defend this. This is known as the Norman Keep, or White Tower, and was built on the orders of a Frenchman. That's a bit of a shock, isn't it? William, Duke of Normandy, was better known as William the Bastard, and he defeated Harold II at the Battle of Hastings on October the 14th, 1066. But for 12 years he had to put down rebellion and insurrection just about everywhere. In the year 1078, his spin doctors came up with a new nickname, William the Conqueror. And as William the Conqueror, he signed the building order for this. It took 20 years to complete. Now, for nearly 500 years, our kings and queens lived on the top floor, and the floor below was the accommodation for their most favoured knights and ladies. The lowest floor with windows is where the kitchens were. There is another floor. It's partly below ground, and the walls there are 15 feet thick. There are no windows. It's dark. Close to the river, below the water table. It's always damp and cold, and the perfect place for the wine. I like the idea of children though, that's good, that's good. Keep thinking that way, okay? The rest of you are obsessed with this prisoner thing. I told you at the beginning this was not built as a prison, so do pay attention. Our first prisoner was a Frenchman. His name was Ranulph de Flambard, and he was the Bishop of Durham. It would be complete insanity to lock a French bishop, or any bishop, in a wine cellar. He was imprisoned in the top of that turret. The year was 1100. By 1101, he noticed the warders liked to drink, so he threw them a party. Wine was brought up from the cellar in casks, which in those days were bound round with rope. Warders did what they do best. Drank too much, ate too much, fell asleep. Ranulph de Flambard saw his moment and seized it. He removed the rope from these casks. This ancient French bishop abseiled 90 odd feet on an improvised line and got away. Our first prisoner escaped. Did we learn from this? No. And the tower's long history, 3,500 prisoners, 81 escapees, an escape ratio of 1 in 42. Statistically, the Tower of London is one of the least secure prisons in the history of the world. But you are quite right. It was not until the turn of the 16th century that the wine rack was put to one side and another rack installed. That rack had a very sinister purpose: torture. Torture is misunderstood. Many people think of torture as a punishment. It isn't. Just feels that way. Torture's a way to keep a conversation going. It is a tool of interrogation. By far the most famous interrogation we had here was that of Guy Fawkes. Now, he was the only man to have entered Parliament with honest, noble intentions, a clear agenda and the resources to see it through. Something you won't find in Parliament any day soon. Now, you can learn more about Guy Fawkes, his alleged crime. That's the Catholic in me coming out now. His interrogation and his execution in the torture exhibit, which is just to the left of the bloody Tower Arch. In there you will see a replica of the rack. You'll see a replica of the scavenger's daughter and the manacles. What you won't see is waterboarding or the latest torture, Britain's Got Talent. This remains a place of torture. It's a gift shop now. My employers insist I tell you, shopping in our gift shop is a happy and pleasant experience. Especially if you like cheap tap at extortionate prices. In the White Tower today you will see the armour of the kings. Shield, lance, sword, bayonet, rifle, pistol, musket, cannon, mortars, big boys' toys. But in there, gentlemen, you are going to feel woefully, woefully inadequate at a very personal level. Check out Henry VIII's armour. Oh, you'll know what I mean when you see it. I consider it a duty to warn you that those codpiece are an early foray into psychological warfare. Now, as civilians, I don't expect any of you to know anything about psychological warfare, but I was trained in this. So I'm now going to give you a quick lesson. Do not worry. I am not going to mess with your fragile mind. Look this way. Sorry, it's just a snot rag. I would have left it alone. Okay. Do you all see my head?
Yes.
Do you all see my head?
Yes.
Do you all see the hat?
Yes.
Psychological. My head does not go to the top, but it is your natural assumption that it does. In your mind, I am arguably taller and more fierce than I really am. But check this out, look at that. So, look at the codpiece. Think of the hat. It's going to be really important for you in a few years, this fella, all right? Wish someone had explained it to me when I was your age. It would have saved me a lot of pain and money. Didn't need to tell you that. On now to Tower Green and the heart of ladies, I know, have not come here to listen to some grumpy old soldier bang on about all this medieval defensive architecture. You've come here for the crown jewels, haven't you? The bling thing. And not because you're interested in their history, because you're not. You just want to make the man you're with feel inadequate again. And you will. Under that clock you will find a door. When you go through that door, you will see the world's largest perfect cut diamond at 530 carats. Don't compare your engagement rings to the Star of Africa. You will also see what is largely regarded as the world's most beautiful diamond, the Koh-i-Noor, the Mountain of Light, the Light of India. And as their name suggests, we've stolen them from everywhere. Although Her Majesty's government insists, I tell you, that they were given to us by grateful nations. Usually at gunpoint. Over here we have the Queen's house, and it was built as a wedding present for Anne Boleyn. The work commenced on this in 1533, the year of the wedding. It was completed in 1541, 5 years after her execution. It is now the home of the Constable of the Tower of London, General the Lord Dannet and his family. And he's being guarded today by soldiers, and I do mean soldiers, of the Coldstream Guards. They're there today in their ceremonial uniforms, red tunics, bearskin hats. Their heads don't go to the top either. You want to see what they look like in their much more comfortable and arguably fashionable combat fatigues? There's 3 of them stood over there. These are real soldiers. Some of these young lads have recently returned from combat operations in Afghanistan. The weapon, yeah, let's hear it for that. Yeah. And the weapon you see is live. This is the British assault rifle with bayonet. So do not upset the soldiers. Got that?
Yes.
Good. They do deserve your respect. Anyone with a rifle and bayonet deserves deserve some respect, especially if you don't have one. Now this is Tower Green and it's colour-coded. It's the grass. I have to explain this because a lot of people spend an hour or so looking for a green tower. These people are Europeans. Now, Europeans are lovely people, but they have syntax problems and talk like Yoda. So, Tower Green.
Grass it is. Help you, I have.
You can visit the Beefeater Tower. That arch window there lets light into a chamber, the walls of which are covered with graffiti, and some of that graffiti is nearly 500 years old. Graffiti is not a new problem. Modern art is a new problem. This monstrosity, not you, perspex, granite, tubular steel, it is a monument to traitors and mutineers, and these scum deserve no monument. This is the site of the private execution scaffold. It was here that Henry VIII had 2 of his wives beheaded. And many husbands bring their wives back to admire the spectacle. Now the first of these was of course Queen Anne Boleyn. She was Henry VIII's second wife. His first wife was the beautiful Catherine of Aragon, a Spaniard, and they were happily married for 17 years. Actually married 23 years. The last 6 years were made miserable and bleak by the fact that she could not provide a son. She'd given him a daughter, but that wasn't good enough. It rarely is. So he divorced her and married Anne Boleyn. Like Catherine, she gave him a daughter and could not give him a son, but she did try hard. Really hard. And not just with Henry. Now, I don't care what your romantic, sentimental attachment might be to the myth that has become Anne Boleyn. I really don't want to know if you were Anne Boleyn in some previous incarnation. On average, I'll meet 3 of you a year. You can't all be right. You're not special, you're sick. Delusional. Get help. Anne Boleyn should not be admired, copied, nor emulated in any way. She was found guilty of adultery with 7 men, including her brother. When you're married to the king, that's treason, and I don't really care who you're married to. It's excessive and weird. Not for her, the block and axe. She asked to go out French fashion with a 2-handed sword. On the 19th of May, 1536, as she knelt there praying for forgiveness, a Frenchman removed her head with 1 stroke of a sword. And it was beautiful. She didn't know she was dead. When her severed head was lifted from the straw, the select audience gasped in amazement and horror because her eyes continued to gaze around at the faces in the crowd. For quite some time, whilst her neck dripped blood, her lips continued to move. But isn't that just like a woman? Last word, last word, last word. Don't know when to keep quiet, do they? You think she'd take the hint? No. She was probably so animated because she expected to be reprieved. No arrangement had been made for a funeral. There was no coffin. Anne Boleyn, the Queen of England, obviously quite a bit shorter now, had to be stuffed into a humble arrow box. And that arrow box now lies inside this chapel. She's in good company. Next to her, Queen Catherine Howard, Henry's 5th wife, also guilty of adultery. I have more sympathy with her. This pretty young thing was a teenager when her father and family forced her to marry the morbidly obese Henry VIII, who by now was 51 years old. He had ulcerating wounds on his legs which stank and would not heal, indicating diabetes, which in those days could not be treated. The apothecary's notes of the time still exist, and these tell us that he was suffering from a variety of diseases, some of which would respond well with penicillin. The notes also tell
Albert, turn!